Depression is nothing the same as mere sadness. Hello everyone, my name is Xandre Acosta, an alumnus of Philippine School Doha and a co-author of this research study. Today I'm going to be sharing with you our research entitled What's Wrong with Me? Understanding the lived experiences of high school students with manifestations of depression. First off, here are my fellow researchers and our advisor. This research study was conducted in Philippine School Doha in Doha, Qatar. Depression roots from many problems. We encounter problems every day. However, not every individual faces these problems in the same perspective. Empirical evidence indicates that frustration, intolerance beliefs, when treated as a single dimension, are related to depression, anxiety, and anger, independently of self-worth beliefs. Moreover, in a study conducted by Jabin in 2012, found that frustration intolerance has differential relationships with specific dysfunctional emotions, including depression, anxiety, and hostility. This research paper seeks to investigate the global sentiments of high school students by determining the cradles of depression and its indicators and how one aspect can slowly steer to depression. Through this phenomenological inquiry, the researchers aim to venture the different possible facets and manifestations that all account to depression. Moving on to the methodology of this research study conducted is a qualitative research study, wherein a phenomenological aspect and approach is used, where it describes the essence of a lived experience of a phenomenon for several individuals, having the purpose of describing the commonalities of the experience. And the second part was the collection of the Lebenswelt of the respondents through interviews or discussions between an interviewer and an individual meant to gather information on a specific set of topics. Moving on to the data collection followed 4 specific steps. The first step is the designing and the creation of interview questions. And the second step, a written permission was sent to the high school students or the respondents of this study. And the third step is to arrange a time and place for interview. And the last step is to record information from interviews using audio or videotape recording and handwritten notes. For this specific research, an audio recording was utilized to gather the information from the respondents. These then audio recordings were transcribed from email to edit transcriptions and then subjected to theming and data analysis. And the data analysis followed a 5-part process. The first is preliminary exploration of the data by reading through the transcripts and writing memos. Second, coding the data by segmenting and labeling the text. Third, verifying the codes through intercoder agreement check. And fourth, responses that express similar ideas and form relationships with each other are compared and grouped into themes. And fifth, connecting and interrelating where thought units emerged and formed into themes. All of these data were then processed through a member check-in procedure and followed a triangulation process. Now moving on to the results. So this specific research article focuses on the stigma of depression, wherein 3 stigma were found and manifestations that lead to depression. The stigma that were uncovered are perfectionism, connectionism, and dysfunctionalism. And the manifestations are the cynicality, vulnerability, and distractibility, which all lead to a common outcome of depression. So the first stigma is perfectionism. Perfectionism is a characteristic that carries a negative orientation with it according to the responses of our participants. And according to Clara et al. At 2007, perfectionism is often seen to exhibit both adaptive and maladaptive components. This type of stigma mainly focuses on self-oriented perfectionism, where an individual focuses on their irrational imperfections and become very corrective to themselves, which then lead to an emotional impact. This stigma was then verified with the respondents of Respondent 7 and Respondent 3. According to Respondent 7, I'm not that good at dealing with any problems. so I easily get frustrated, stressed, and anxious because of it. Respondent 3 added, for me, I am frustrated about one thing, even if it is big or small, because I am afraid of mistakes. So, if I make one mistake, I will get depressed on a problem. This stigma then transformed to a manifestation of cynicality. Cynicality is operationally defined as a characteristic of a person with prejudice towards others and to a general outlook in life, and is labeled as social perfectionist. So perfectionism stigma then transforms to a cynicality manifestation, which ultimately leads to depression. The second stigma is connectionism. This is when an individual is encumbered with overwhelming frustration that leads them to connect different fabricated networks and relationships to a problem, which then leads them to having a pessimistic and defeatist attitude. And according to the responses of Respondent 2, my mindset tries to connect every problem together, so when I'm frustrated at one problem, it usually spreads to other problems as well. He added, I feel helpless and overwhelmed as I don't know what to do to remain composed. This stigma then transforms to the manifestation of vulnerability. Studies show that cognitive vulnerability interacts with stress and that people with negative cognitive styles are vulnerable to depression. So this stigma shows that an individual connects different problems together even if they have no relationship at all, making them vulnerable to such negative cognitive styles, then ultimately leads to depression. And the last and third stigma that was found is dysfunctionalism. Dysfunctionalism is when an individual is preoccupied with a lot of works or problems that they can't deal with, and it leads them to having a dysfunctional attitude, draining them of their physical and psychological energy, thus destroying their behavioral status. According to Beck 1979, it proposed that depressogenic schemas or dysfunctional attitudes constitute a cognitive predisposition or vulnerability to depression. And according to Hankin 2009, dysfunctional attitudes shaped with various experiences beginning from childhood might cause the onset of depression as they may be activated with a trigger incident. This signifies that these problems don't necessarily have to come from recent events or just recent parts or recent problems, but it could come from childhood traumas, problems in the past that once triggered make the individual focus on these problems more and overwhelming them, thus making them dysfunctional, which then transforms to a manifestation of distractibility, because when the individual is dysfunctional, they lose interest in what they do, because according to the response of Respondent 7, I feel like I lose my proper decision making and they start to do unnecessary things. Respondent 4 added, normally if I'm frustrated, I'm not in the mood. Even if we do this most enjoyable activities, I still can't enjoy it because I am frustrated. This dysfunctionalist attitude then leads them to having a manifestation of distractibility, which ultimately leads to depression. So in conclusion, it was found that there were 3 stigmas of depression that will lead to the manifestations of depression. The first being perfectionism that turns into cynicality. Second, connectionism to vulnerability. And lastly, dysfunctionalism that leads to distractibility. Now, through identifying the coping mechanisms, we'll give the students clear options and suggestions to practical meanings of facing their depression, and thus providing them awareness on the impacts, advantages, and disadvantages of each individual method. So this study uncovered the different stigmas of depression and how it manifests to depression. So with that being said, I would like to leave you with a reminder that depression is a deceitful mask. Anyone can wear it. Choose not to. Thank you for your time and thank you for listening to this presentation.